First thing that we want to do is kind of, hey y'all, Eliana, hey, good to see you in person. Eliana, do you ever just like click on Zoom and then just go do something else and just pretend that you're on or anything? I'm just kidding. Just don't answer that one. Like, tell my dad I'm on. And so let's just take a moment in the beginning to actually appreciate some of the things that we've learned. I want to ask a question. You don't have to have like a real answer to this right now. Just kind of think about it for a second. Basically, when we introduced this course and we started and the first day you come, did you have any kind of anticipation or expectation of, all right, we're going to learn about grief and living with God in grief? Like maybe there's just a little bit, you may not have thought it through, wrote it down or nothing, but just want you to take a moment, like what maybe was you expecting to learn? And one of the reasons I say that is because as we go through courses like this, they take time. And we might forget sometimes how much we've actually learned through stuff. And so I just want you to look at your notes, and we're going to look at what have you learned so far. And that's not a question. I'm kind of reviewing with you things that we've covered. So one of the things that you could say is I can define grief. It's the internal response to loss. Learning to identify and define what grief is. That's one of the first steps. So it's an internal response. It's what's happening inside of us. Number two, I can recognize grief in myself. You're starting to recognize, okay, this might be signs of grief. That's a big help. Number three, I know grief does not follow a timeline. Realizing not everyone knows that. You may not have been familiar with that because a lot of times we might not think it out loud like that, but there's always this little thing, are they still grieving with that or am I still dealing with this? And we realize grief doesn't follow a timeline. There's no set pattern. Some people have a 2-month or a 3-month. It just doesn't work that way. Grief is something that we learn is part of life. Let's look at the next one. I know the presence of grief does not mean the absence of God. We've repeated that a lot. That's something that you know. You may take that for granted. All of us could. We could take that for granted as we're in here. But I promise you, if you deal with people, if you talk to people, get involved with them in their grief, you're going to be able to share that with people. Because Satan always works to create doubts in our mind. Doubts of what is going on. Doubts about God's presence in our situation. And so that's something you'll be able to take with you. And that's why you should take that key verse with you as well, Psalms 34:18. Next one says, I know to talk to God honestly about my grief. That's something that maybe you didn't know coming into this. Should be on, is it the first page? Is it listed? Are these there?
One was, and then...
Did they they're not there?
Well, that says lesson, then lesson 2. And then I think...
Is it lesson 3?
Lesson 3 says identify more losses that lead to grief.
We may be on a different one.
Like God.
Yes. How is this happening?
Oh, and then actually page 3 and 2 are the same. No, they're not the same.
Oh, I might know how this happened. Thank you, Landon. Give me a second. I think I know. So sometimes I will copy a lesson, delete everything, have the heading and all that, and just fill in the right lesson number. That may be what happened here. So let me pull and make sure. All right, let's go. Ooh. This is going to take another moment. Because it's on the other computer. And with our Zoom group, I have no idea what I sent y'all. So you may have a right one, you may not. I do. I just got notes that, stuck in there. No, most of the time this should... So what does y'all say?
The very beginning just says introduction. The series is called Life with God and Grief. Key verse, the Lord is nigh to them. Review. In lesson 1, we define grief. Lesson 2, we look for the most recognized source of grief. Then it jumps down to loss of health or ability.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think that's what happened is that it got put under the wrong think I was starting to give y'all next week's. So just hold what I told you.
Lesson 3.
Just hold what I told you to next week, and it'll come up.
Yep, we'll remember it for sure.
Yeah, y'all gonna hold that. You're gonna have that.
It sounded really good, though.
Sometimes you deal with grief over not being able to get things right. Good thing is I've already reviewed this lesson for today. So I don't know what we're going to talk about. Now, I think I looked at the right one yesterday and then this one today when I was putting on. Because I do stuff on my computer, then I send it over to the church's computer, and sometimes it just gets the different one. All right, let's open it. All right, so Zoom group, the notes that was up there are just not going to be there. And if I didn't send you the right one, let me know and I'll send it to you a little bit later. So let me do this here. Fix this. Okay, so lesson number 3, y'all. Thank you for your patience and your grace. Here's a really funny thing. I'm actually, after doing the 2 lessons, I was looking at it, I was like, next week's lesson, I'm a little more excited about than this week's lesson. Maybe subconsciously, I was just wanting to skip to it. All right, so key verse is, the Lord is nigh to them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be a contrite spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all. The reason we use those verses is because we want to remember, even the Bible talks about the fact that God is close to us in our time of loss or grief or suffering. I like to point out the Bible tells us that because we will not always recognize that on our own. I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to people and they are dealing with, I don't feel God. I don't feel God. I don't know where God's at in this. And sometimes people will stop and they feel really bad because they're like, I'm not saying, they're trying to justify, like they don't want to get in trouble with God for saying something like that. But they're just being honest with the fact that I just don't feel God, I don't see God. And sometimes we have to know, the Bible says the just shall live by what? Faith. There is faith that we have to practice sometimes. And the Bible says that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by what? The Word of God. Sometimes we have to go to the Bible and remember that God is with us in our pain. And it doesn't mean that we won't ever feel Him, but sometimes by faith to start with is the step that gets us to closer to feeling Him. Review lesson 1, we define grief. We'll talk about more about that in the next lesson. What happens inside of a person when something meaningful is changed, when something meaningful is taken away, or when something meaningful never comes to be, meaning that we expected something, we had hoped for something, and it just didn't happen. It fell apart, or it never came to be. So those are things that can produce grief. All right, in lesson 2, we looked at the most recognized source of grief, and that is the loss of a loved one. That's the most recognized, time that grief would be in a person's life. But today we want to look at other things that bring grief into our life, and to realize, we don't always associate grief with this thing that happened in my life. If someone dies, if we lose a loved one, we automatically connect grief to that, right? But there are some things that happen that we don't automatically connect grief to. And when that happens, there leaves a question in our mind. Why am I feeling this way? If we can answer that question to ourselves and say, because you're grieving this. And I really, I think one of the neat parts of being this far along in the ministry that I've been is I can actually say, I have counseled people, or I have dealt with people. Some of the most meaningful things, turning points I have been able to talk to people about sometimes is say, you are grieving the loss of, and then fill in the blank. And I can see the light bulb go off. I can see the question mark come in for some at first. And then once a person realizes that, they go, oh, this is grief. Well, now what do I do? And then we can walk through that process. So let's take a look at some of those. Loss of health or ability. Anybody? Loss of health or ability. Can't see. Literally right now, I can identify everyone on the back row, especially my wife. Y'all get that in a second. I can identify everyone on the back row, especially my wife. But your expressions, I can almost make that up. I'm not 100% sure if you're smiling at me, grimacing at me, or what you're doing. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Hearing is not always what it used to be. Doing things isn't always. Tommy was talking about doing some work yesterday, cutting trees. He's feeling it today. It's just those different things show up. Also, when you go to the doctor and you start going to the doctor more often, when you start having these things that reoccur, when they start saying things, we know, oh, that's just getting older. We just kind of laugh about it, but you realize something? Grief also sets in. We don't like not being as strong, as fast, as healthy, as capable as we used to be. I was reading, I'm on my third book about grief and trauma for this. I mean, I've had a lot of stuff through the years, but one dealt with something, loss of hair. Both men and women. Not all of it, but just realizing, things aren't what they used to be. Brings grief into people's life. It was so many different things. And so once we realize, okay, wait a minute, I can put this grief label on things in my life, and that will help me to deal with it better. All right, so health changes. Change may come suddenly through illness or injury, slowly through aging or chronic conditions. When the body no longer functions as it once did, people experience real loss that produces grief. I cannot do that anymore. I can't use this part of my body like I used to. I can't do the things that I don't feel. When people start to realize, I don't feel like doing the things, like I need to do this, but I used to be able to do the whole house in one day, and now I can't get the whole house done in a week or something like that. It weighs on us more than we realize. And so sometimes recognizing that. So the loss may include physical abilities or inner energy, as I just mentioned, independence. I need help doing something now. I need help doing something that was a normal thing in my life to do. I've always, even if it's brushing my hair or, obviously I don't have that problem, but, just with people, dealing with the different types of things that all of a sudden maybe now you need help doing. Or you see that, hey, it won't be long and I'm going to need more help doing this. Wednesday, Jeannie Keene came to church. What do we do? Has anyone noticed? And if you don't know this, help us out with it. If Jeannie pulls up, she parks over here, some of us will go outside and help her get her stuff out of the car, help her get things together. She's said before, she loves coming to church, but it wears her out. And she has to get her stuff in and out. It's not as easy. And she talks about it sometimes. It's just, used to be able to pull up, come in, go out. Now, it's a process. And if you hear her talk about it, it's a frustrating process. And so recognizing that's loss. Grief starts to say for all of us in these things. So the loss includes physical ability, independence, life, the life someone expected to live. I thought, I know a number of people that they worked really hard, they planned to retire and travel or retire and do a project, retire and do things. And yet they either end up retiring early because of health, or they end up retiring and starting that process and realize it ended really quick. They wasn't able to do that. Health set in, theirs, someone else's, different things. And people, we might just think of it as, okay, well, they had to adjust their plans, but there's grief involved. Think about it. If you worked for, just say, the last 15 years of your life thinking, when I get done, I know when I'm going to retire, and I know what I'm going to do when I retire. For 15 years. And then all of a sudden, that's taken away. It's more than a change of plans, right? And the reason we say this is because you may not experience this, but part of our course is learning how to identify it in other people so that we know better how to relate to them and how to help them. Because grief can also bring out signs as anger, frustration, withdrawal, those types of things. So maybe you've got a parent or a friend or someone and they were planning things and that changed in their life, and now all of a sudden you kind of notice things. They're a little snippy or less like the person that you remember them being, or they're distant from people. You can go, wait a minute, they're probably dealing with grief. Now I know how to approach that a little bit differently. So that's part of what we're doing. Why it gets missed is traditionally health-related grief has only been acknowledged when it comes through a tragic event. If you have a car accident, lose a leg, people understand that, grief, all right? If you have a stroke, lose the ability to use part of your body, people recognize, hey, they're going to take some time to grieve over that. But what about you can't see what you used to be able to see? And you're standing in your living room or your kitchen trying to read a pill bottle and you just can't do it, you know, and you're getting mad. You know, those are things that happen. Grief is a part of that, and it gets missed. All right, so the danger is that unrecognized grief continues to affect thoughts, emotions, energy, and relationships, even while the person tries to push forward and adapt. Hey, I'm just getting older, I just have to deal with it. But we've already learned something about grief, and we'll learn more about grief coming up, is that we need to address grief. Even in the little things like this, it's not like we had to have a big, meeting and everything about it, but we need to acknowledge it and then sometimes say, Lord, I'm kind of frustrated. I'm dealing with this. I can't see what I used to see. I can't hear things. I missed out on that. It's getting more frustrating. Learning to acknowledge it helps us to deal with it. It helps our brains to process it. So understanding the internal response, that's grief. When health changes, the body that once worked reliably no longer does. That loss produces an internal response. Sadness, frustration, fear. Anyone see the last one? Exhaustion. Why am I tired all the time? That could be a sign that grief is a part of it. I'm dealing with something internally all the time, and it's wearing me out. And so, again, in the upcoming lessons, we deal with more of that. So medical studies confirm this. And so research published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine found that people with chronic illnesses experience the same grief responses, sadness, anger, difficulty concentrating, changes in their sleep or their appetite that appear after bereavement, meaning after you lose a loved one. Think about that. No difference. And so a study in disability and rehabilitation showed that grief related to health, and it all disappeared. There we go. Health loss often goes unrecognized because it doesn't fit the, just kind of put in quotes, right, expected picture of grief. Yet it follows what? It follows the same internal pattern, and it affects the daily life in similar ways. In other words, what it's saying is we can miss this because we don't identify it to the same thing as if a person lost a loved one. Finish this sentence for me. I'll say it this way. I shouldn't complain because others have it worse. Is that, we could debate it, is that a true statement? All right, Kurt says yes and no. Why is that a yes and no? Well, it is true that others have it worse. It's probably true we shouldn't just complain. But what does that statement do? Like, we've learned, why do we say that? Because we've heard people say that, right? And once we've heard people say it, we start to think, well, it must be true. You hear anything long enough, you start to believe it. Even if we don't process through, what does that actually mean? So why is that a dangerous statement? I shouldn't complain because others have it worse. Why is that dangerous? Chris?
Because you can't measure someone's situation against another person's situation. It's not apples and apples.
It's not apples and apples. You can't measure your situation against someone else's. Trying to... making sure that that's on. There we go. So what we're saying is, it might be true that someone has things worse than you. But you know what else is true? You just experienced a loss. You experienced a loss. What comes with loss? Grief. So fine, don't complain. Don't draw all the attention to yourself, don't want to. But also do not fail to recognize your own grief and accept that you not only have the right, you have the obligation to deal with your grief. Because when we don't, it's detrimental to us. And so I hope that that kind of helps you today to start to realize, okay, let me catch myself. Remember, winning the war in your mind, catch the lie. The lie is, I shouldn't complain, other people have it worse. Okay, fine, I shouldn't complain, but what I'm actually telling myself is, I shouldn't feel sorry for myself. Well, fine, don't feel sorry for yourself. How do we word this? I need to deal with this loss. I have a responsibility to deal with it. I have a right to deal with it. I mean, what would you tell someone if they said, I just lost my spouse, and you see them hurting, you see the physical side of them hurting, and they say, I shouldn't complain. I know someone that lost their spouse and their child. I shouldn't. What would you tell them? You're right, you shouldn't complain. Is that what you tell them? What are you going to tell them? I mean, literally, like, think about it. What's your response to that person? They just said that to you.
You have to deal with your life. What you're going through is valid, no matter it's not against it, it works. You have to handle you.
Exactly.
Allow yourself to process and work through.
You have to handle you. Your experience is, or wait a minute, let's say it this way. Their experience is actually irrelevant to your experience. And what I mean by that is, let's put it in simple terms. I shouldn't be hungry. This person already ate. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That person eating doesn't fill your belly up. Well, that person's loss doesn't affect yours. You know, so when we recognize that, it's like, what happens to this person is not really meaning that something shouldn't be true and processed in my life. And so when we're learning to live with God in grief, we're learning to recognize, hey, you know what? I know that person, and I can understand how they felt, but I have a loss that I have to deal with, and if I don't, it's detrimental to me and my family. So hopefully y'all kind of see that. So let's look at seeing God through faith. God is present in this loss. We know our verse. I'm going to skip through that. The Apostle Paul lived with what he called a thorn in the flesh, 2 Corinthians 12:7. He asked God 3 times to remove it, but God's answer was this: my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Paul learned to live with the physical limitations and with God's strength. God created us as whole beings. He says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And so when our body suffers, the whole person is affected. Everything about us, body, soul, and spirit, is all affected. Recognizing this grief allows us to bring it to God rather than suppress it or dismiss it. When we don't bring our grief to God, we are making a tragic mistake in our life, and we don't acknowledge it, or we say that someone has it worse. So if you're hurting, hurt. Here's what the Bible says. And you can help me to finish this. Weep with those who what? Who weep. Notice what it did not say. Weep with those who have the most serious loss. Weep with those who what? Weep. If someone's hurting, hurt with them. Start there. If you want to help someone, start with where their pain is. Instead of dismissing it, pushing it out, trying to get them over it real quick, God says, weep with those that weep. It also says, laugh with those that laugh, you know? Enjoy life with those. I think what it's saying is get to where people are and meet them in their situation. And that's where you'll find the biggest help. Loss of work or career. All right, so work provides. We talked about this a little bit in illustrations last week. Work provides more than income. Y'all agree with that? It provides more than income. It's more than just that. That's why people that have plenty of money still work. It's more than income. So when work ends through a job, a loss, retirement, injury, career change, people experience real loss. That produces real grief. And so a person loses a job after years of faithful work. Someone retires, they no longer has the daily purpose that they once had. Those are things that start to affect. And so why this gets missed is in your notes. It says when work ends, people immediately focus on practical concerns, these kind of things. Finding new work. When the job's over, you got what? You found out today you're losing your job. What's the thought in your mind? I'm going on vacation. No, it's probably I got to find another job. Now, I did have an uncle, Josh will appreciate this, worked at Goodyear years ago, worked in maintenance, I'm not saying he was rich, he just had sufficient money, all right? Goodyear does what about it? Well, back then they did it more often. Every 4 years they would go on strike. You know what many of them did? I remember my dad working in the tobacco fields during the summer, trying to make sure we had food on our table while they were on strike. You know what my uncle was doing? Sitting at the lake. And my dad would laugh about it because my dad said, once they're announced the strike is over, you have 2 weeks to return back to work. I don't know if that's still true or not, but they did at the time. They had 2 weeks to return back to work. My uncle's at the lake. They would find out the strike is over. You know when he would come back? 2 weeks later. He dealt with things differently than people that was dealing with the strike did. But the point is that, hey, for some people, when you find out you've lost something, your first thought is, I got to get some more work. So the brain is now engaged.
I've seen both.
You've seen both, okay.
Some just like that.
Yeah, I mean, some people actually knew. Anyway, we won't get into Goodyear stuff right now. So when it ends, you start thinking about work, adjusting your finances, filling in the time. These are real and necessary concerns. However, people often assume that once these practical matters are addressed, everything else will return to normal, such as if I find a new job, oh, good, everything's over, no one's worried, everything's fine. Everything's gone back to normal, but the person still lost their job. It affects them. It affects them in many ways. What gets missed is what work actually provided for some people. For many people, work is their identity. I am a teacher. I am a builder. It defines who they are. Work provides a reason to get up each morning, a sense of usefulness and contribution to something larger than themselves. It provides daily structure, mental engagement, social connection, and a place to belong. And so when work ends, if it's retirement or you're just disability, when work ends, all of these disappear at once. Losing these creates grief that continues even after a new job is found or the finances are stabilized. Research confirms this. A study published in the, can anyone pronounce that one for me? Gerontologist found that retirement often triggers what researchers call identity crisis, as people lose the primary way they define themselves for decades. Research in social science and medicine found that involuntary job loss produces grief responses lasting well beyond the period of unemployment, because the loss was not just financial, but also social, physiological. A study in Journal of Occupational Health and Psychology showed something else, showed that even planned retirement often produces unexpected grief as people lose daily structure, purpose, and workplace relationships. I thought that was interesting. So if you know people that become disabled or people that become retired, understand that there's the retirement celebration, and then pay attention. If there's someone close to you, they may struggle with that. And they may not even realize they're struggling with it. Yeah, it happens a lot.
Within a year or two because they just lost interest in life.
Yeah. And I can tell you someone that does not experience that, my neighbors. They both retired early. They work in their yard all day, every day. During the winter, they go to Florida. He inherited a house from his mom on a golf course in Florida, and they own that now. And so during the winter, they go to Florida and do nothing. Well, I say do nothing. They work around the house. They literally, if you want to find my neighbors, just go out to the bottom of their yard and find them in the garden or, just out in things. They didn't struggle with that. But I know plenty of people that did. And so not everyone will do that. So understanding that internal loss or what's going on is when work role ends, something meaningful has been taken away. So the identity shifts. Instead of I am a teacher, it becomes I used to be a teacher. And I didn't just choose teachers because we have teachers in here, but just understanding, whatever that might be, it changes, not from I am to I was. This is the work I did. And that can change people. And so you have to recognize that, pick up on it a little bit as you go. Seeing God through that, God is present, obviously, in the loss. We continue to see that. Jesus made a statement I thought was interesting in John 5:17, "My Father worketh, hitherto I work." Work is part of how God made us to reflect his image. Don't forget, work is actually something, as much as we all want to get out of work, it is something God designed us to do. And the loss of that opportunity to do that can be very difficult, very challenging. Sometimes simply having people that have had to stop, even in older age, is maybe finding things for them to do that are helpful in areas. Don't overtax them, and don't just use them as cheap labor, but just finding things that can help them to be contributing to things. If you go to God's Pit Crew, where Kurt volunteers and does a lot of work, there are a lot of retired or disabled people that are there, a lot. They love it. They're a part of something meaningful. And it gives them something to do, but it also gives them a community of people to work with. When I worked down there, it was amazing to see the people and the connection that they had and the pride they took in all of it. So just be aware that even a planned retirement, celebrate that, but be aware that you or someone going through that may really still struggle with the adjustment of that. All right, loss of relationships. Relationships provide connection, support, companionship, shared history. Yeah, they do. I mean, think about, I say things all the time. When I've noticed this, when I tell people about me and Kurt, I'll say, yeah, we've been friends since the 4th grade. Why do I always clarify that? I mean, I've done it forever. Why do I clarify? It kind of shows, to me, I guess it reminds me of the history. And it's not just school, like we shared so much life together. And so you start to think about when you have a relationship with somebody, it's really, you have this history, this relationship. Part of the graduation from high school, people struggle with that sometimes. Why? Because you have a shared history with people that some of them you've known since kindergarten. And you all of a sudden things are going to change. You're not going to see these people on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. And so those things change. When relationships provide this kind of connection for people. And so understanding grief helps us to look at this part of it. So relationships, when they end, they have many different ways. Again, death is one of those. You lose someone through death. Distance separates people, like people move away. The closeness fades over time. That's tough. It's challenging for people. People grow, they grow apart as life takes them in different directions. There's people that, think about someone that maybe you was really good friends with when you were younger, like in school and stuff, but you didn't really finish high school close to that person. Like you knew them, you were still friends, but you weren't, you didn't hang out as much. You didn't do the same things. Things change over time, and so you kind of grow apart with that. Some people have family like that. You're really close to your cousins kind of young, and then over time, you start to go, we don't really have anything in common other than the fact that we're cousins. We kind of grown into different areas and stuff. But you could still miss that relationship, that you've had with them. So people grow apart as life takes a different direction. Someone or sometimes something else takes the place that relationship once held. A new friend, watching someone else get a new friend that they're doing more stuff with, that can be very challenging and bring grief. It's from any age. Very young kids, don't overlook kids dealing with grief. When they see these things happening, a new job, what does that do? Well, it takes you from people that, there's people that I worked with that I was pretty good friends with. And then when we no longer work together, it's not that we weren't friends anymore, but we weren't pretty good friends. I didn't really keep up with their life, didn't have the opportunity to engage with them. And that can be something like you miss those people sometimes. New job, new priority. Sometimes you get new priorities in life, maybe through children or other things. Responsibilities of taking care of parents or things can, make you have more priorities that you don't have the time to do with other people. Values or priorities shift. That happens a lot. When a person becomes a Christian, your values shift. Now you got new convictions and a changed life. That means you no longer enjoy doing the things that you used to do with that person. And so that can change through things, and the relationship changes or ends. And sometimes people think, well, that's a good thing, but it doesn't matter. We have to understand this. Positive loss, like, hey, you're graduating, you're moving on to something better. Isn't that great? It's still a loss of these things. changing from friends that, hey, you shouldn't have been hanging around that friend anyway, they was always getting you in trouble, I'm glad you're not with them anymore, doesn't mean they're not going to miss that relationship, that connection, that whole thing that they've had. So just, if you're aware of this, it helps you to engage and deal with people, yourself, and with others as well. Family members stop speaking to each other. That can be a big change. A betrayal destroys trust and relationship that once felt secure, safe. Divorce ends a marriage. That's tough because you can lose more than, it's tough enough to lose a marriage through divorce, but you lose much more. You get married, you get in-laws, right? You get a whole connection of people. Sometimes you miss some of those people that you're not able to continue right away with. Friends that you're not able to do. So just kind of noticing these things, it's bigger than just the first loss that people recognize. Why it gets missed sometimes when a relationship ends but the person is still alive, meaning they didn't die, that's not why you're not with them anymore. People often don't recognize it as grief. The loss may seem less significant than death, or others may minimize it, especially if they don't approve of the relationship that you had anyway. I'm glad you're not with that person, or I'm glad you're not friends with them anymore. That can be a tough thing. You might be honest about that, but it can be a tough thing for a person to hear, because it's really just reminding them, I'm still, there's a void there. Maybe it was a negative thing in my life, but there's still a void there. And so kind of learning that helps us a lot. Again, I said, when people are even moving to something positive, recognize they might still deal with grief. So don't minimize that. Don't miss it. What gets missed is the loss is real. When distance separates people or life takes them in different directions, the connection that once existed, it's gone. When values or priorities shift, the relationship that was built on shared experiences, that changes, it ends. When someone or something else takes priority, such as a new friend or a new thing comes into place, the place that relationship held is no longer there. So when a family member stops speaking or a marriage ends, the daily presence that was shared there, the history, all of that, the planned future, the things, the events, all stuff, it all changes, and that can bring lots of grief. Sometimes just recognizing I'm not just mad about something, or I'm not just hurt about something, I'm actually dealing with grief about this. And once we recognize it as grief, we know what to do with grief. And that's part of this whole process. Learning to live with God in grief means learning to take all of these things and go, you're already starting to realize there's not going to be a single day in your life that you're not, these things have already happened to you. So they're part of your life. And that's why we say learning to live with it. Because most of us want what? I grieved during this time of life. That's not true. You've grieved all through your life. You just didn't recognize it all. And so learning to live with it means we don't fear it. We learn that it's a part of my life. I know how to manage that. And I hope that that's something you take with you through all of this. Let's look at understanding the internal response. When the relationship ends, something meaningful has been taken away. That's what we just keep reiterating. So the person who shared daily life is gone. And the future that was expected will not happen. Identity shifts. We becomes I. Trust feels broken. The internal response to these losses, sadness, anger, loneliness, confusion, that is grief. So recognize those things. Seeing God through it, I'm going to move kind of quickly through some of that. I'm going to hit to the second paragraph. You can read all of it as you do. God himself knows the pain of broken relationships. That's important. So let's read that again. If you look at it in your notes, it's the second paragraph under that. God himself knows the pain of broken relationships. Have you ever thought about that? He describes his people turning away from him as a betrayal that causes grief. Here's what he said. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Jesus spoke that to the Jewish people in Matthew chapter number 23. He said, I wanted to gather you together under me and protect you, but you wouldn't have it. What he's saying is, I know loss. God understands the pain of rejection and loss. Jesus experienced rejection from those closest to him. So he knows what it feels like to be betrayed, abandoned, misunderstood. Now that sounds sad, but I want to say it is so amazing to realize that we get to take our grief to Jesus. And we think, well, he's Jesus, he's God, he's never felt like this. No, he has. If you deal with a loss and someone walks into the room that you're close to and they've recently dealt with the same loss that you just experienced, if you've ever been in that situation, you will see those two people connect in a way that no other people in that room do. Because they immediately both know that person might be closer to you, but me and you just shared the same experience. And they will connect. And if we can understand that and go to Jesus and realize you have shared what I feel, what I just experienced, well, that's a closeness that helps us with our grief. That's why it's important to go to God with this stuff. All right, so he knows what it feels like to be betrayed, abandoned. He promises, I will never leave you nor forsake you. He remains faithful. The Lord is nigh to them. Again, our verse comes up a lot through these. Let's go to the next one with the time that we have, because we got to finish up. Loss of what was hoped for or expected but never came to be. This is important. I won't have time to cover it the way I'd like to, but I would love for you to read it, take a look at it, think about it. I'm going to go through it, but I would love to spend like a whole lesson on it. Some grief comes from loss of what never happened. So people grieve for the marriage that never came, never did happen. The family they expected to have, the career they pursued but didn't get. The education they planned but couldn't complete. The calling they felt but couldn't fulfill. The reconciliation or fixing a relationship that never actually occurred. Or the life they expected but they never experienced. A person hoped to marry but they never did. Someone wanted a job or promotion but they didn't get it. A person planned to start a business but circumstances prevented it. A relationship needed to be reconciled but it never happened. Someone expected their life to look different than it does, and all of a sudden you realize that's grief. And sometimes you need to go to those people in your life, either dealing with it with recognize with yourself, I'm dealing with the loss of a job I never got, a career I never got to do, a family I didn't, a relationship I thought, I thought I was going to be friends with this person, or I thought I was going to have a relationship with this person, anything. I've dealt with people before that were, much older in life and never married. And people kind of like, well, they're fine, they're good, but really and truly, they're fine, they're coping. But remember, we already learned, just because life goes back to normal doesn't mean that there's no grief there. And sometimes people have to recognize there's going to be some grief through things that you never got to experience. And so that's a part of things to recognize. Why it gets missed, this grief is often invisible because there is nothing tangible to put to it. No funeral, no sympathy cards, no public acknowledgement. None of that happens. Why? Because it never existed. And so people may feel they have no right to grieve something that never did happen. Why am I sad about this? I never even had a relationship, never even had this. Why am I sad about this? You're sad because it didn't happen. And that's okay. All right, others may dismiss it. You can't miss what you never had. That's not true. People miss what they never had all the time. It's a real life thing. So the person grieving may feel ashamed for mourning a dream rather than a reality. What gets missed is that the loss is real. Hope is real. Expectation is real. The future someone believed would happen, that never happened. All that's real. So be really careful as you deal with people about this and understand, hey, you know what? That expectation, that thing hoped for, it didn't happen, that's a loss. And any loss brings grief. And so as we learn that, we learn what to do with it and how to process it. Let's just go real quick to some practical steps. It's at the end of it, page 7, because we are at 1046 right now. First, name the loss. Identify what you are grieving and say it out loud. I would encourage each of you to actually go home and get out a piece of paper at some time this week and write down some things that, walk through this and look at it. What am I grieving? What might I grieve. And it doesn't mean grieving doesn't mean a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're not functioning or you're not whole. It means it's a part of your life. It's a segment. And, if you're a 100% person, grief is one of those percentages in there. Just understand it. Name it. Identify what you're grieving. Remember that in Winning the War of Your Mind, he said you can't fix something that you don't name it. So you have to name it to start with. Second, write it down. That's why I said get some kind of pen and paper, computer, type it in. Put it into words on paper, something you can see with your eyes. And third, bring it to God, honestly. Speak to him directly about what you're feeling. Even if it feels trivial, still tell God that. Like, I feel a little weird telling you this, but tell him that. And if it's really hurtful, say, I'm angry about this, or I'm mad about that. I've never admitted this before. So number one, name it. Number two, write it down. Number three, bring it to God. Speak honestly. What are you feeling? What have you lost? And remember, his presence is there. So God bless y'all. Thank you so much. We'll come back together in just a little while for our service. I hope these things are helping y'all. It helps when we're both on the same page. I recognize that.